The gunshot cracked across the Arizona desert, just as the sun began its descent toward the jagged horizon. And Josephine Barrett felt the bullet tear through her shoulder before she even registered the sound. She staggered backward against the fence post of her ranch, her rifle slipping from her grasp as crimson bloomed across the faded cotton of her shirt. Through the haze of shock and pain, she saw 3 men on horseback silhouetted against the dying light, their faces obscured by bandanas, their intentions clear as day. They had come for her land, just as they had threatened for months, and now they had drawn first blood. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to stay upright, her good hand pressing against the wound as hot blood seeped between her fingers. The riders were advancing, their horses kicking up dust devils in their wake. Josephine had known this day might come ever since her father died 6 months ago, leaving her alone to defend the 200 acres of scrubland and precious water rights that men like these would kill for without a second thought. She fumbled for the revolver at her hip, her vision swimming, but her fingers felt thick and clumsy. Then another sound split the air, a sharp whistle followed by the thunder of hooves coming fast from the eastern ridge. The 3 riders turned, startled, as a lone horseman came barreling down the slope with reckless speed. Josephine could barely make out his features through her dimming vision, but she saw the flash of his drawn pistol, heard the warning shots he fired into the air. The would-be claim jumpers exchanged quick glances, clearly not expecting interference, and decided discretion was the better part of valor. They wheeled their horses around and took off toward the rocky badlands, disappearing into the gathering dusk. The stranger dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, rushing to Josephine's side as her legs finally gave out. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself staring up into a weathered face topped with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was young, maybe 25 to her 22 years, with the sun-bronzed skin of a man who lived his life outdoors. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough but gentle as he lowered her carefully to the ground. "Let me see how bad it is." "My land," she managed to gasp out, her teeth chattering despite the lingering heat of the September evening. "They want my land." "Your land will be here tomorrow if you are," he replied firmly, already tearing strips from his own shirt. "Right now we need to stop this bleeding. This is going to hurt." He pressed the wadded fabric hard against her shoulder, and Josephine cried out at the white-hot lance of agony that shot through her. Her vision went black at the edges, but she fought to stay conscious, her fingers digging into the dusty earth beneath her. "What's your name?" the stranger asked, keeping steady pressure on the wound while his eyes scanned her face. "Stay with me. Tell me your name." "Josephine," she breathed. "Josephine Barrett, this is my ranch." "Quinn Ingram," he introduced himself, using his free hand to check the exit wound on her back. "And you are lucky, Miss Barrett. Bullet went clean through, but you have lost a lot of blood and we need to get you to a doctor. Coolidge has one, does it not?" 5 miles south, she confirmed weakly. "But those men, they will come back." "Not tonight, they will not," Quinn said with certainty. "They are cowards who prey on lone women. They were not expecting a fight." He looked toward the ranch house, a small adobe structure with a sagging porch. "Is there anyone else here? Family? Ranch hands?" Josephine shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as nausea rolled through her. "Just me. Since my father passed." Something flickered across Quinn's face, an emotion she could not quite read in her deteriorating state. Sympathy, perhaps, or anger at the injustice of it. "All right, then. We ride for Coolidge. Can you hold on if I lift you?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to prove she was strong enough, but honesty won out. "I do not know." "Then I will make sure you do not fall," he promised. With careful efficiency, he tied the makeshift bandage tight around her shoulder, then scooped her up as though she weighed nothing. Josephine bit back another cry as the movement jostled her injury. Quinn carried her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patient and still as its master mounted while holding her. He settled her sideways across his lap, her head against his chest, one arm secure around her waist while his other hand maintained pressure on her wound. "Hold on to me," he instructed, and Josephine managed to curl her uninjured arm around his torso, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. It was improper, being held this way by a stranger, but propriety seemed a distant concern when life was draining out of her with every passing moment. Quinn urged his horse into a smooth canter, fast enough to cover ground but not so reckless as to jostle his injured passenger unnecessarily. The desert landscape blurred past them, saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels in the twilight. Josephine drifted in and out of awareness, anchored only by the firm pressure of Quinn's hand on her shoulder and the rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them. "Stay awake, Josephine," Quinn said, his voice cutting through the fog that threatened to pull her under. "Talk to me. Tell me about your ranch." "Water," she mumbled. "We have water. Spring-fed well never runs dry. That is why they want it." Her words slurred together, but she forced them out. "Father bought it cheap because the previous owner was murdered. People said it was cursed. Father did not believe in curses." "Smart man," Quinn replied, though his jaw tightened. He knew as well as she did that in Arizona territory in 1884, water was worth more than gold, and men died for it regularly. "What about you? Do you believe in curses?" "I believe in bullets," Josephine said with a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "And I believe those men will be back." "Then we will deal with them when they come," Quinn said firmly. "But first we keep you alive. Do you hear me? You do not get to die on my watch." There was something in his voice, a fierce determination that penetrated even through her pain-addled mind. Josephine found herself clinging tighter to him, drawing strength from his certainty even as her own faded. She wanted to ask why he cared, why he had intervened at all, but the words would not come. Darkness kept pulling at her, sweet and tempting, promising an end to the pain. "No," Quinn said sharply, jostling her slightly. "Eyes open, Josephine. Look, we can see the lights of Coolidge ahead. 5 more minutes. You can make it 5 more minutes." She forced her eyes open and saw the scattered glow of oil lamps in windows, the small cluster of buildings that made up the town. It looked impossibly far away, but Quinn was right. 5 minutes. She could do 5 minutes. She had to. The ride into town was a blur of concerned faces and raised voices. Quinn did not stop to answer questions, just called out for the doctor as he navigated the dusty Main Street. An older man with silver hair and spectacles emerged from a building marked with a painted cross, took one look at Josephine's pale face and blood-soaked clothes, and immediately ushered them inside. "Examining table," the doctor ordered briskly, clearing instruments and supplies with a sweep of his arm. "What happened?" "Gunshot, clean through the shoulder," Quinn reported as he carefully laid Josephine down. He kept his hand pressed to the wound, not releasing the pressure until the doctor was ready to take over. "Maybe 30 minutes ago. She has lost a fair amount of blood." The doctor nodded grimly, already cutting away Josephine's shirt to expose the injury. "I am Dr. Harrison." "You did well keeping pressure on it, young man. Miss, can you hear me? I am going to give you something for the pain, but I need to clean and stitch this wound. It will not be pleasant." "Do it," Josephine managed through gritted teeth. She felt Quinn's hand find hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze, and she held on like it was a lifeline. What followed was an eternity of searing pain, despite the laudanum Dr. Harrison administered. Josephine felt every probe of the wound, every pull of the needle and thread as he stitched both entry and exit holes. She bit down on the leather strap the doctor had given her and squeezed Quinn's hand hard enough that she thought she might break his fingers, but he never pulled away, never flinched. He stayed right there beside her, his other hand smoothing the sweat-dampened hair back from her forehead, murmuring words she could not quite make out but found comforting nonetheless. Finally, mercifully, it was over. Dr. Harrison wrapped her shoulder in clean white bandages and stepped back to survey his work. "You are a fortunate young woman," he said seriously. "Another inch to the left and that bullet would have hit the artery. You would have bled out before anyone could have helped you." "Lucky," Josephine echoed faintly, though she did not feel particularly fortunate at the moment. "She needs rest and recovery," the doctor continued, addressing Quinn now. "At least a week of bed rest, preferably 2. The wound must be kept clean and the bandages changed daily." "Is there family to care for her?" Quinn glanced at Josephine, then back to the doctor. "She lives alone on her ranch. The men who shot her were trying to force her off her land. They will likely return." Dr. Harrison's expression darkened. "Then she certainly cannot go back there." "Miss Barrett, do you have anyone in town? Friends? Relations?" Josephine shook her head weakly. Her father had been a solitary man, and she had inherited that trait. They had come to Arizona territory only 3 years ago, seeking a fresh start after her mother's death in Kansas. She had acquaintances in Coolidge, people she traded with and greeted politely, but no one she could impose upon for weeks of care. "There is a boarding house," the doctor suggested. "Mrs. Chen runs a respectable establishment, and she has nursed sick boarders before." "No money," Josephine admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "The ranch barely breaks even. I have maybe $5 to my name." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Dr. Harrison sighed, clearly troubled. Quinn looked between them, his jaw working as he seemed to wrestle with something. Finally, he spoke. "She can stay at my place," he said quietly. "I have a small ranch about 3 miles west of town. 2 bedrooms, and my aunt lives there to keep house. It would be entirely proper, and I can keep watch in case those claim jumpers decide to cause more trouble." Both Josephine and the doctor stared at him. "You do not even know me," Josephine protested weakly. "Why would you do that?" Quinn met her eyes, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch despite the laudanum fog. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no woman should have to face what you are facing alone. Besides, I owe you." "Owe me?" Josephine asked, confused. "For what?" "I will explain later," Quinn promised. "When you are stronger. Dr. Harrison, would that arrangement be acceptable?" The doctor studied Quinn with a critical eye, clearly assessing his character. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "I know your aunt, Quinn Ingram. Emma Calloway is a good woman. If she is there to chaperone and assist with the nursing, then yes, I believe that would be acceptable. Certainly better than Miss Barrett returning to an isolated ranch where armed men are waiting to finish what they started." Josephine knew she should argue, should insist on her independence, but the truth was she had no better options. The thought of returning to her ranch alone, injured and vulnerable, filled her with a fear she was too tired to hide. And there was something about Quinn Ingram, something solid and trustworthy, that made her want to accept his offer despite barely knowing him. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." Quinn nodded, relief evident on his face. "I will bring my wagon around." She should not ride horseback in her condition. As he left to fetch the wagon, Dr. Harrison prepared a bottle of laudanum and gave Josephine stern instructions about rest, fluids, and keeping the wound clean. She listened with half an ear, her thoughts already drifting. Who was Quinn Ingram, And why had he been riding across her property at exactly the right moment? What did he mean when he said he owed her? And why did the feeling of his hand in hers linger like a brand even after he had let go? The wagon ride to Quinn's ranch was gentler than the desperate race to town had been, but Josephine was beyond caring. The laudanum had pulled her into a dreamy half-consciousness where pain existed, but seemed distant, someone else's problem. She was vaguely aware of being carried again, of a woman's voice, soft and concerned, and of being settled into a bed with cool sheets and a pillow that smelled like sage. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through lace curtains, and a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying brown hair was sitting in a chair beside the bed, knitting. The woman looked up when Josephine stirred and smiled warmly. "There you are," she said gently. "I am Emma Calloway, Quinn's aunt. How are you feeling, dear?" Josephine took inventory of her body. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, and her mouth felt like it was filled with cotton, but she was alive, and the sharp, tearing agony from yesterday had subsided to something merely painful. "Like I was shot," she admitted hoarsely. Emma chuckled and set aside her knitting to pour a glass of water from a pitcher on the bedside table. She helped Josephine sit up enough to drink, supporting her with a practiced hand. "I imagine so. You gave Quinn quite a scare. He sat in that chair all night watching over you." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "He should not have. He barely knows me." "That is what I said," Emma replied with a knowing smile, "but my nephew can be quite stubborn when he sets his mind to something. He also rode out to your ranch at first light to check on things and board up the windows. He found evidence that those men had come back during the night, but they did not stay long. Probably got nervous when you did not return." Dread coiled in Josephine's stomach. "My animals." "I have chickens and 2 goats and a horse." "All safe," Emma assured her quickly. "Quinn brought them back here. Your horse is in our stable and the chickens and goats are in the yard. He also packed up your personal belongings, the things he thought you would want. He was very respectful, only took clothes and a few items from your dresser, some photographs and such." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes, though whether from relief or overwhelming gratitude she could not say. "I do not understand why he is doing all this." Emma's expression grew serious. She pulled her chair closer and took Josephine's uninjured hand in both of hers. "There is something you should know, dear. Your father, Jacob Barrett, he saved Quinn's life 2 years ago. Quinn was working as a ranch hand for a man named Victor Stiles over in Florence. Stiles was a cruel employer, and when Quinn objected to how Stiles treated his workers, there was a confrontation. Stiles drew on Quinn, would have killed him, but your father happened to be in town that day. Jacob stepped in, talked Stiles down, gave Quinn the chance to get away. Quinn never forgot that kindness." Josephine's mind reeled. Her father had never mentioned the incident, but that was like him. Jacob Barrett had been a quiet man who believed in doing right without seeking recognition. "I had no idea." "Your father was a good man," Emma said softly. "When Quinn heard he had passed, he wanted to pay his respects, to tell you what Jacob had done for him. But by the time he worked up the nerve to ride out to your ranch, months had gone by. Yesterday, he was finally making that journey when he heard the gunshot." Understanding crashed over Josephine like a wave. That explained Quinn's fierce determination to save her, his insistence on helping. He saw it as repaying a debt to her father. It was noble, certainly, but she found herself oddly disappointed. Some foolish part of her had hoped his concern was personal, that he had helped her because he wanted to, not because he felt obligated. "I see," she said quietly, unable to keep a hint of sadness from her voice. "Then I am grateful to him for honoring my father's memory." Emma gave her a shrewd look, as though she could read the thoughts behind Josephine's words, but she said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she changed the bandage on Josephine's shoulder with efficient gentleness, applied fresh salve, and insisted she eat some broth and bread despite her lack of appetite. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Emma tended to Josephine's physical needs with maternal care, while Quinn handled the practical matters of merging her small homestead with his ranch operations. He was gone most days, working his land and now hers too, checking the fence lines and water sources, making sure no one else tried to stake a claim. In the evenings, he would visit briefly, sitting in the chair beside her bed to give her reports on the ranch and ask about her recovery. Those conversations were the highlight of Josephine's days, though she tried not to examine too closely why that was. Quinn had a quiet competence about him, a steadiness that made her feel safe. He spoke economically but with warmth, and he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter despite her pain. She learned that he had come to Arizona from Colorado 5 years ago, that he had built his ranch from nothing, that he loved the desert landscape with a passion she recognized because she felt it too. But there was always a distance in his manner, a carefulness that suggested he was being respectful, even formal. He never stayed long, never touched her except when helping her stand or walk as her strength returned. He was kind and attentive in the way one might be to an honored guest, or a responsibility taken seriously, and it made Josephine's heart ache in ways she did not fully understand. By the end of the first week, she could sit up without assistance and walk short distances, though her shoulder remained stiff and painful. Dr. Harrison visited and pronounced himself pleased with her progress. By the second week, she was insisting on helping Emma with light chores, unable to bear feeling useless any longer. Emma protested but eventually relented, letting Josephine shell peas and fold laundry while seated at the kitchen table. It was during one of these quiet domestic moments that Quinn came home earlier than usual, his expression grim. Both women looked up as he entered, immediately sensing trouble. "What is it?" Emma asked, setting down her rolling pin. Quinn pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Josephine had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Saw tracks on the Barrett property, at least 4 riders, maybe 5. They circled the house but did not approach. I think they are watching, waiting to see if Josephine returns." Josephine's hand stilled on the shirt she had been folding. "They will not give up," she said quietly. "Not as long as I own that land. Water rights are too valuable." "Then we make sure they know you are not alone anymore," Quinn said firmly. "I have been thinking about this. Josephine, I have a proposal for you and I want you to hear me out before you answer." She met his eyes, her heart suddenly racing. "I am listening." Quinn pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, his expression earnest. "Your ranch borders mine. Together our properties would make a substantial spread, big enough to be defensible and profitable. Separately, we are both vulnerable, both struggling. I propose we merge the ranches legally." "A partnership." "A partnership," Josephine repeated carefully, trying to ignore the stab of disappointment. She had hoped for just a moment that he might be proposing something else entirely. "A marriage," Quinn clarified, and Josephine's breath caught. "I know how that sounds. I know we barely know each other. But it would solve multiple problems at once. Married, the ranch would be ours jointly. You would have legal protection, a husband to stand with you against those claim jumpers. I would have a partner to help build something lasting. And Emma could return to town, to her own home that she has been neglecting to stay here and chaperone." Emma made a small noise of protest at that, but Quinn continued, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face. "I am not asking you to love me," he said quietly. I know that is not something that can be forced or manufactured. I am offering you a practical arrangement, a way forward that benefits us both. But I promise you this, I would treat you with respect and kindness. I would honor you as my wife and partner. And if, someday, affection grows between us, then that would be a blessing. If not, we would still have a good working relationship and a secure future. Josephine's mind spun. Everything he said made sense logically. It was a practical solution to an immediate problem. Marriage would indeed protect her land rights more securely than anything else. As Quinn's wife, she would have the backing of his reputation and his gun if it came to that. But the idea of marrying for pure practicality, of binding herself to a man who saw her as a business arrangement, hurt in ways she had not anticipated. You do not love me, she said, needing to hear him confirm it, though she knew the answer. I care about you, Quinn replied honestly. I care about what happens to you. I respect you and your courage. I enjoy your company and your conversation. Is that love? I do not know. I have never been in love before. But I believe it is a foundation we could build on if you were willing. Emma was watching them both with an expression Josephine could not read, but she remained silent, letting them work through this themselves. Josephine looked down at her hands, at the calluses from ranch work, at the healing wounds on her knuckles from a dozen small injuries. She thought about her father, about the land he had left her, about the men who wanted to take it away. She thought about facing them alone, about the very real possibility that they would succeed without someone to stand beside her. And she thought about Quinn Ingram, about his steady presence and dry humor, about the way he had held her as he raced to save her life, about the kindness in his eyes and the strength in his hands. She did not love him either, not yet, but she felt something when he was near, something warm and hopeful that whispered of possibilities. I need honesty between us, she said finally, looking up to meet his gaze. If we do this, if we marry, I need you to promise that you will always be honest with me. No pretty lies, no false assurances, just truth, even when it is hard. I promise, Quinn said without hesitation. And I want to be a true partner, Josephine continued, her voice gaining strength. Not just a wife who cooks and cleans. I want to work the ranch to make decisions, to have my voice heard. I would expect nothing less, Quinn replied, and she saw the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. You think I want some delicate flower who faints at the sight of hard work? I have seen you, Josephine. I know what you are made of. I want that strength beside me. Josephine felt something in her chest unfurl, like a fist slowly opening. Then yes, she said softly, I will marry you. The smile that broke across Quinn's face was like sunrise, transforming his usually serious features into something breathtaking. Emma clapped her hands together, beaming. Oh, this is wonderful. We must plan. The Reverend can marry you at the church, and I will make a proper meal for afterward. When were you thinking? Soon, Quinn said, his eyes still on Josephine. No point in waiting. The sooner we are legally married, the sooner those claim jumpers will have to accept that the Barrett Ranch is untouchable. This Sunday, Emma decided. That gives us 4 days to prepare. Josephine, we will make you a proper dress, something simple but nice. Quinn, you will need to speak with Reverend Matthews and arrange everything. Oh, there is so much to do. As Emma bustled off, already making lists, Quinn reached across the table and took Josephine's hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and the warmth of his calloused palm against hers sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her injury. Thank you, he said quietly. I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy. You already have, Josephine replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. You gave me my life back, Quinn. Everything else we will figure out together. The 4 days until the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Emma threw herself into preparations with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign, and Josephine found herself swept along despite her lingering weakness. They made over one of Emma's old dresses, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of Josephine's eyes. Quinn rode into Coolidge and returned with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, his expression almost shy as he showed it to her. News of the impending marriage spread through the small community with the speed of wildfire. Some of the townspeople clearly thought it was a hasty decision, but most seemed to understand the practical necessity of it. Dr. Harrison gave Josephine a knowing look when she came in for her final checkup, but pronounced her healthy enough for the ceremony, with strict instructions to continue taking it easy for another few weeks. On Sunday morning, Josephine stood in Emma's bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The blue dress fit well, nipped at the waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. Emma had woven wildflowers through her dark hair, which hung loose down her back in defiance of current fashion. Her shoulder was still bandaged beneath the dress, but the pain had faded to a dull ache she could mostly ignore. "You look beautiful," Emma said softly, appearing behind her in the mirror. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Josephine admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. I am not afraid of marrying Quinn. I am afraid of failing him, of not being enough." Emma turned Josephine to face her, her expression serious. "You listen to me, Josephine Barrett. That boy out there, the one pacing the floor like a caged mountain lion, he is just as nervous as you are. He is afraid of the exact same thing, that he will not be enough for you. But I have watched you two together these past weeks, and I see something neither of you seems to see yet." "What is that?" Josephine asked. Emma smiled. "You are already in love with each other. You just have not realized it yet." Before Josephine could respond, there was a knock at the door. It was time. Emma squeezed her hand once, then opened the door to reveal Quinn standing in the hallway, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He had trimmed his beard and looked younger, almost vulnerable. When he saw Josephine, his eyes widened and he seemed to forget how to breathe. "You look," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "You look like everything I never knew I wanted." The raw honesty in his voice made Josephine's eyes sting with sudden tears. She crossed to him and took his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy." He laughed, the tension breaking, and brought her hand to his lips in a gesture that felt both courtly and sincere. "Shall we go get married?" "Let us," Josephine agreed. The ceremony was simple, held in Coolidge's small white church with Reverend Matthews presiding. Emma served as witness along with Dr. Harrison and a handful of townspeople who had come to show their support. Josephine spoke her vows in a clear voice, meaning every word even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Quinn's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn cupped Josephine's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that she felt something inside her chest crack open. The small reception at Emma's house was warm and lively, with food and music and well wishes from their neighbors. But Josephine found herself constantly aware of Quinn, of where he was in the room, of the way his eyes sought hers across the space. When he came to stand beside her, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that was becoming familiar, she leaned into him without thinking, feeling the solid warmth of him along her side. "Ready to go home?" he murmured into her ear as the sun began to set. "Yes," Josephine breathed and realized she meant it. The small ranch house she had shared with Emma and Quinn for 2 weeks had already become more of a home than her father's place had ever been. Or perhaps it was not the house at all, but the man standing beside her that made anywhere feel like home. They said their goodbyes to the lingering guests, Emma hugging them both fiercely and whispering something to Quinn that made him flush and nod. Then they were alone in the wagon, riding through the purple twilight toward the ranch. Neither spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts, but Quinn's hand found Josephine's and held it, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent pleasant shivers up her arm. When they arrived home, Quinn helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, mindful of her still healing shoulder. But instead of immediately heading inside, he paused, looking down at her in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "I know this is not a traditional wedding night," he said quietly. "You are still recovering, and I do not want to rush you or push you into anything you are not ready for. We have time to figure all of this out." Josephine's heart swelled at his consideration, at the way he always seemed to put her comfort first. "Quinn," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face, "I may have married you for practical reasons, but that is not why I want you to kiss me right now." His eyes darkened, and he leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste press of mouths at the altar. This kiss was hungry and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Josephine gasped against his mouth, and he gentled immediately, but she chased his lips, her good hand fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I am trying very hard to be a gentleman," he said, his voice rough. "I appreciate that," Josephine replied, her lips curving into a smile. "But I am also a woman who was raised on a ranch. I am not as delicate as you seem to think." Quinn laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Noted. But your shoulder needs more time to heal, and I need more time to figure out how I got so lucky." He kissed her once more, softly, then took her hand and led her inside. The weeks that followed their wedding were a revelation for Josephine. She and Quinn settled into life together with surprising ease, their days filled with the work of running the combined ranch and their nights with quiet conversations by the fire. As her shoulder healed and her strength returned, she was able to take on more of the physical labor, and true to his word, Quinn treated her as a full partner in all decisions. They worked side by side, mending fences and checking on cattle, and Josephine found herself constantly aware of him in new ways. The flex of his muscles as he lifted hay bales, the concentration on his face as he worked on a stubborn hinge, the way he smiled at her when he thought she was not looking. The attraction between them was undeniable, simmering just beneath the surface of their daily interactions, but Quinn remained careful, never pushing for more than she offered. It was Josephine who finally broke one evening, unable to bear the careful distance any longer. They were alone in the house, Emma having moved back to her own place in town the week after the wedding. Quinn was reading by lamplight, and Josephine was supposed to be mending a shirt, but she kept watching him instead, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. "Quinn," she said finally, setting down her sewing. He looked up, immediately attentive. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, standing and crossing to where he sat. She took the book from his hands and set it aside, then settled herself on his lap, being careful of her shoulder. "That is the problem. Everything is right, and yet we are living like polite strangers in some ways." Quinn's hands came up to rest on her waist, his eyes searching her face. "I do not want to hurt you." "You will not," Josephine promised. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palms. "I am healed enough, and I do not want to wait any more. I want my husband, all of him, no more holding back." The careful control Quinn had maintained shattered like glass. He surged up, capturing her mouth in a kiss that made her toes curl, his arms coming around her to pull her tight against him. She melted into him, into the heat and strength of him, into the promise of what they were building together. When he carried her to their bedroom, she went willingly, her heart singing with joy and anticipation. Later, wrapped in his arms in the darkness, Josephine traced patterns on Quinn's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had been shot defending her land, had nearly died, and had married a virtual stranger out of practicality. Yet here she was, completely in love with her husband, happier than she had ever imagined being. "What are you thinking?" Quinn murmured, his fingers playing with her hair. "That Emma was right," Josephine admitted. "About what?" She told me on our wedding day that we were already in love with each other. We just had not realized it yet. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I think I started falling for you the moment you told me to hold on, when you were racing me to town. You made me feel safe when I should have been terrified." Quinn pulled her back down against his chest, his heart steady beneath her ear. "I started falling for you before I ever met you," he said quietly. "Your father told me about you that day he saved my life. He said his daughter was strong and brave and stubborn as a mule. He was so proud of you. When I heard he had passed, I kept thinking about you out there alone, trying to hold on to your ranch. I wanted to help, but I did not know how to approach you without seeming forward. Then I heard that gunshot, and I was so afraid I would be too late." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks at the emotion in his voice. "You were right on time," she whispered. "You saved my life in more ways than one." They fell asleep tangled together, and when morning came, they faced the day as true partners in every sense. The threatened claim jumpers never returned, word having spread that Josephine Barrett was now Josephine Ingram, wife of Quinn Ingram, and that the combined ranch was more than capable of defending itself. The men had moved on to easier prey, or so the rumors said. The months turned into a year, and then two. The ranch prospered under their joint management, their land and livestock growing steadily. They built a larger house, one with proper bedrooms and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. Emma visited regularly, delighted with how her matchmaking instincts had proven correct. In the spring of 1886, Josephine discovered she was expecting their first child. Quinn was beside himself with joy and worry, treating her like spun glass, despite her laughing protests that pregnancy was not an illness. When their son was born in the cool of November, red-faced and squalling, Quinn held him with such reverence that Josephine fell in love with her husband all over again. They named the boy Jacob, after Josephine's father, and he grew into a strong, curious child who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, with her mother's dark hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. They named her Emma, and the older woman cried when they told her, holding the baby with the tenderness of a grandmother. Life was not always easy. The desert was harsh, and there were years of drought and years of plenty, times when money was tight and times when they could breathe easier. But through it all, Quinn and Josephine faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. They had started with a practical arrangement born of necessity and desperation, but they had built something beautiful and lasting, something worth fighting for. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Josephine out to the spot where he had first found her bleeding in the dust. They had turned that patch of land into a garden, a green oasis fed by the spring that had caused so much trouble. They sat on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree they had planted together, watching their children play in the distance. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked, his arm around her shoulders. Marrying me so quickly, tying your fate to mine." Josephine leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, dust and sage and home. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me everything, Quinn. A home, a family, a love I never thought I would find. What about you? Any regrets?" "Just one," Quinn said, and Josephine pulled back to look at him in surprise. He was smiling, that warm smile that still made her heart skip. "I regret that I did not meet you sooner. I wish I could have had even more years with you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, pouring a decade of love into it. When they pulled apart, the children were running toward them, Jacob shouting about a lizard he had found and Emma demanding to be picked up. Quinn scooped up his daughter while Josephine listened to their son's excited description of his discovery. And she thought about how far they had come from that terrified, bleeding woman and the stranger who had refused to let her die. The years continued to roll by, bringing new challenges and new joys. They added more children to their family, 2 more sons who kept the ranch lively and loud. They expanded their operations, becoming one of the most respected ranches in that part of Arizona territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Quinn and Josephine celebrated with their grown children and their grandchildren, marveling at how much the world had changed since that fateful day in 1884. But some things never changed. Quinn still looked at Josephine like she was the most precious thing in his world, and she still felt her heart race when he walked into a room. They still worked side by side, partners in every sense, making decisions together and supporting each other through whatever life threw at them. They had built their love on a foundation of necessity and practicality, but it had grown into something timeless and unshakable. On a warm evening in the summer of 1920, 36 years after their first meeting, Quinn and Josephine sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with silver, and their faces lined with the evidence of a life well lived. Their children were grown with families of their own, though most had stayed close, building houses on the ranch land and continuing the legacy Jacob Barrett had started so long ago. "I was thinking about something today," Josephine said, her hand in Quinn's as always. "About that day you found me when I had been shot. Do you remember what you said to me?" "I said a lot of things," Quinn replied with a smile. "Most of them aimed at keeping you conscious and alive. You told me my land would be here tomorrow if I was," Josephine reminded him. "You said we needed to stop the bleeding, that right now was about surviving." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "But you gave me so much more than survival, Quinn. You gave me a life worth living, a love worth holding on to. You gave me everything." Quinn brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in the gesture that had become his signature over the decades. "We gave each other everything," he corrected gently. "You were the brave one, Josephine. You took a chance on a stranger, built a life with me from nothing but hope and determination. I was just smart enough to hold on and never let go." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, surrounded by the land they had protected and nurtured, secure in the love they had forged through fire and blood and unwavering commitment. Their story had started with violence and desperation, with a bullet tearing through flesh and a stranger's hand holding back death. But it had become something beautiful, a testament to the fact that love could bloom even in the harshest soil, that 2 people could build something lasting even when the odds were stacked against them. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Quinn pulled Josephine closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, right where she belonged. They had been given an unexpected second chance at life all those years ago on a dusty patch of Arizona ground, and they had made the most of every moment since. Their children and grandchildren would carry on what they had built, but the foundation would always be this: two people who had chosen each other against all logic and had proven that sometimes the best decisions are the ones made with hearts wide open, even in the face of danger and uncertainty. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. And in the circle of each other's arms, Quinn and Josephine Ingram faced whatever was to come the way they had always faced everything, together, unshakable, eternally grateful for the day a gunshot had brought them into each other's lives. Their love story had been written in dust and blood, but it had grown into something eternal, something that would echo through generations as proof that true love, once found, can weather any storm and bloom even in the most unlikely places.